when it comes to running discovery calls, I almost treat them the same way as cold calls, in that I have to deliver value first at the beginning of the cold call rather than just coming in with a bunch of prepared questions. Like, there's no rule that you have to ask permission on a cold call or that you have to get them with some psychological pattern interrupt. Like, I, to this day, 6 years in, just say,
if you've been watching this podcast for any length of time, you know that I generally don't partner with other influencers or people with a social media following, and I'm definitely open to it, don't get me wrong, but I really prioritize staying highly focused on tech sales and also highly focused on actionable advice. I try as best as possible to minimize the fluff, and it's really why I'm excited today to have Connor Murray on, someone who I actually found through his own YouTube channel, which I highly encourage you to check out. He has a very similar approach. He didn't start in sales and immediately start making content. He was, like myself, very frustrated with a lot of the generic copy-paste content that doesn't necessarily apply to tech sales that's out there on the internet, which ultimately compelled him about 5 years into his career to start making content on YouTube. We're not only gonna talk about some of the pitfalls of training and what Connor does differently, but also from a more macro level of an entire tech sales career, how Connor has continued to progress his career, selling to very large organizations now and holding several roles within a large company like Oracle. There's a ton of great nuggets here. I know you guys are gonna get a lot out of this. And as we jump in, just a reminder that if you're watching on YouTube, we are on Spotify if you wanna listen on the go. And if you are on Spotify, we do have a YouTube channel, Tech Sales with Higher Levels. And we also turn ads off on every single one of these long form podcasts. We support ourselves through our own platform, higherlevels.com. Completely understand if you're not looking for training, but if you are looking for training and also a live community with top performers from Amazon, Snowflake, ServiceNow, Oracle, many other great companies in the tech sales space, feel free to check us out again at higherlevels.com. Nonetheless, Connor, this was an amazingly deep conversation. Really appreciate all the advice, and I know everyone listening is going to get a ton out of it.
Connor, maybe before we start getting too deep in it, maybe a quick overview of your background, and yeah, really looking forward to the chat today.
Yeah, excited as well. Thanks for having me on. Good to reconnect, and yeah, excited to share with your audience. So like you said, I've been with Oracle a little over 6 years now. I started in the SDR entry-level role, and I've put on quite a few hats at Oracle. I started selling what we call our cloud infrastructure, which is comparable to like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and I was focused on mid-market accounts. Then I did 2 years as an account executive in the upmarket applications team. I was focused mostly on financial and accounting software. Then I did, which we could touch on and where some of these trainings came into play, 2 years as an SDR manager, where I was really focused more on the coaching aspect and developing a lot of people just coming into the industry or maybe a year into role and helping them get to that account executive role. And now for a little over a year, I went back to the fields, selling into enterprise accounts. So I wanted to get back out there, but yeah, so I've done quite a few different roles at Oracle. We could talk about the journey, but yeah, what you laid out sounds great. Excited to dive into it.
Yeah. And I know, some of the reason that we started making content, I know to some extent we kind of both felt like this was more or less like an accident, but we felt really compelled to, after a while, make content that we wish we had, 3 to 5 years prior and really starting out. So I'd love to maybe start there in terms of, really when you got the itch to make content, what were you seeing that you felt wasn't accurate or realistic, and what kind of ultimately prompted you to start making content in the first place?
Yeah. So like you said, never really had dreams of getting on to YouTube or the idea that I was ever going to make content. I'd say it really came my second year as an SDR manager. So this was my 4th year at Oracle. And I was just looking at some of what I was seeing on the internet and YouTube, LinkedIn, trainings I was seeing everywhere. And I noticed a lot of it hadn't changed. A lot of it was the same stuff that I was seeing being taught when I was new. And it was a lot of stuff I tried that just didn't work for me. And I'll just name a few. People don't get offended. I know some of you might use this stuff, but for me, it was like permission-based openers and pattern interrupts and this stuff that seemed a little over the top and crazy to me that I was trying when I was new. And I just remember I was putting myself back in the shoes of myself when I was new. And I really wanted to learn how to cold call. I really wanted to learn how to be successful at cold emailing, just the SDR job in general. And I was trying a lot of the stuff that I saw taught out there on YouTube and LinkedIn, the ones with the most views and the the videos that were most popular. And none of it was really resonating with me. And I was seeing a lot of the sales trainers teach the same exact type of content. They were basically just regurgitating it and it wasn't changing. And I sort of realized a lot of these people aren't incentivized to change the training because they're just the trainers. It's easy for them to keep it the same and not really pay attention to what's new, what's working, how the industry's changing. They would rather the training stay the same. That makes their job easier. And a lot of the trainers have actually not been in sales for a while. All they've done is train. And then after they're done training the SDRs and they go off on their own, they're not the ones there with them actually seeing if the stuff worked. So I basically just noticed
sorry, quick question there. This is great because I'd love for everyone listening to, if you could maybe give an example. You mentioned like permission-based openers, and I believe another thing that you found weren't working. Like, what's a real thing that you tried that you're seeing that's out there, like you're mentioning, that just quite frankly like sucked?
Yeah, the permission-based pattern interrupt. Hey, do you have 27 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? And they teach it like they have these great explanations that sound smart. Like, oh yeah, it's a psychological pattern interrupt, and you're gonna totally like get them out of the middle of their day, and it'll catch them off guard. I don't know. They have these beautiful explanations for why it works, and I just think it leads people down the wrong path. They end up overcomplicating it. A lot of these sales trainers too, they have years of experience. They might have 5+, 10+ years of experience. So they might be really good at these techniques, but are they the correct techniques to teach a new SDR? I almost compare it to like if Steph Curry, just used a basketball example, like arguably best shooter of all time. Is he going to teach someone who's just picking up a basketball for the first time the same techniques that he uses in the NBA and how he probably changed his shot to get his release off quicker because he's now got 6'10" guys trying to block his shot? Like, no, you'd probably start someone brand new on the block and teach them how to shoot a layup and just get them used to seeing the ball go through the hoop. And then once they know, like, okay, this is actually doable, you move them back a bit, you start teaching them new techniques. I almost view it the same way in cold calling. Another example I'll give you is like, tell them about an article you read. Like, so cold call someone and, hey, I was reading in an article, like this statistic and that statistic about how we can improve your business. And it's all this stuff that sounds good, it sounds smart, but then when you actually put it into practice on a real cold call where you just interrupted someone out of the blue, you have a new SDR who's probably not that confident, their tonality's off, and they're sheepishly telling them about an article they read and some random statistic about how they can improve gross margins by like 40%. And the guy's like, what? I'm like walking to get coffee and you think you understand my business well enough that you can improve It's all this stuff that sounds smart. And so what my philosophy was like, let's just peel this back. Let's help people get a base structure in place that's simple, easy, repeatable. It might not be the flashiest or the best techniques, but something I know works and is easy to implement. And then as they get more experience and get used to hearing the word yes on the phone, then we can start to mix in some of these more advanced techniques, if you want to call them that. Because I have nothing against permission-based openers or pattern interrupts. You should use what feels comfortable and helps you sound confident. I just find that a lot of these techniques taught by sales trainers, LinkedIn, YouTube, the new SDRs, when they try them, they don't feel comfortable. They don't sound confident using them, and it just sends them down the wrong path. So yeah.
No, it's an awesome analogy. It's funny. I listened to like my cold calls when I first started, and it's like disgusting. It makes my stomach just like get tight because they were so bad. Like, there is value in picking something, but I think to your point, oftentimes you see that finish line result and you don't realize like part of it is like building the confidence to get to that point. And if you're trying to do like a tactic before even just being basically able to like say hello on the phone,
Yes.
Obviously that's oversimplifying it, but it's like, you've got to just build the reps and understand that like, one, some people are just going to hang up on you. There's nothing you can do. And two, you're better off picking something simple and starting there before trying to go to like, I thought your analogy was great. Maybe as a next step too, it's like, you're in the unique position of not just making content from your own experience, but you've also taught BDRs and SDRs. Maybe to that person that's early in their career, like, if there's anything you felt you designed differently about the training, if it was breaking it into its easiest parts, like, how did you actually get someone who's new in their career to really understand and make very quick progress as opposed to like, feeling like they made progress, doing these dumb things that aren't actually getting results. Like, I'd love you to speak to that in more depth.
Yeah. I would simplify it as much as possible. The trainings oftentimes are weeks or a couple months, and there's so many different techniques, so many people teaching different things. There's so much noise. I tried to just peel it down, and I almost made it sound too easy, like too good to be true, but that was the whole point. And a lot of it, I would just show them how it's done. I would show them an example. That's another part that irks me about a lot of sales trainers is they don't show what they teach in action. They just teach it. I think particularly as an SDR manager, I think you have a lot of responsibility in that role. You have like a team that you're developing. A lot of them are too shy or hesitant to even like show their reps how to cold call or how they do it. I feel like that builds a lot of trust with the reps if they even just once they see their manager in action. So part of it was just showing them and then guiding them on cold calls. And I could go into some of the specific techniques I talk about, like the opening is one example where I preach less is more. You don't have to do these. You don't have to. You can if you feel comfortable, but there's no rule that you have to ask permission on a cold call or that you have to get them with some psychological pattern interrupt. Like I, to this day, 6 years in, just say, how are you? And I talk about the tone. Like I like to use a downward inflection. I call it an assumptive formality, where the purpose of the opening is really to just get to step two, like get to your value proposition, where you're telling them who you are, why you're calling, and then what you want, which is time on their calendar. And then after you tell them what you want, like, hey, I'm looking to set up some time next week. Are you free on Wednesday or Thursday? There's really only a few outcomes after you do that. Either best case, they say yes, which doesn't always happen, but they say yes. They could either give you a hard no, which is like, nope, I'm good, hang up. Not really much you can do there. Or if it's not one of those two, they could give you an objection or ask you a question, which I almost put in this same bucket as an objection. So then it's like, okay, after you deliver who you are, why you're calling, and what you want, it's either a yes, a no, which are both pretty self-explanatory. You either book the meeting or make your next call, or you get an objection. And if you're prepared to handle the most common ones in advance, which I preach, practice those most common ones behind the scenes, then you can put yourself in the best position to overcome it. But I preach taking control, following the same formula. I'm not one of these people. A lot of them are like, oh, I get bored on cold calls. I got to try different things and mix it up. That's not, to me, what makes cold calling fun is the results and booking meetings. So to me, I do the same thing almost every single time. I teach people to do the same thing almost every time. I teach them how to track their results too. I try and make the process very scientific. So yeah.
Do you see, and I think for someone who's newer here or just trying to refresh their skills on cold calling, or even I certainly think like the way you've broken this into chunks also applies for something like discovery. And we could definitely get into that as well. But I'm curious, right, for that person who's newer in their sales career, or maybe making this transition to tech sales and trying to learn how to cold call technical personas for the first time. I love how you've broken it down into chunks on like a day-to-day tactical level. If I'm an SDR on your team, do you encourage me to, like, when I'm literally at zero, write it down, like intro, this is what I'm going to say for my intro. This is the question I'm going to ask them. Like, how do you have someone who's still nervous, who's still like, you gave us great information, but I also see people who are new trying to put that all together in real time and struggling. So how do I make it more systematic? How do I break that down? So the first, month or two, I'm learning that I can still get through it, even though it's a lot.
Yep. So I have it's more, it's like a formula. I call it a value statement, and it's what I just laid out. So the opening is meant to be the same every time, so you don't have to think about it. It's just give an assumptive formality. And then as soon as you get that formality back from them, you take control and you tell them who you are, why you're calling, what you want. The key part about this is that most of the words are the same, no matter who you're calling. You're simply telling them, here's who I am. And the examples, there's examples on my channel if you want to go check it out, but they're pretty simple. Like it's not a lot of words. It's meant to be concise and succinct. And the only thing you really have to change around are a few key words based on who you're calling. So, and that's really the why I'm calling piece. So if you're reaching out to someone in finance, for example, you tell them that you're part of a team that works on priorities related to planning, budgeting, forecasting. If you then start calling someone from HR, you don't have to change anything about the script, but instead of saying planning, budgeting, forecasting, you say, I'm part of a team that works on priorities related to talent management, recruiting, payroll, whatever sounds most relevant to the persona you're calling. So I work at a company where there's a ton of different personas and we sell a ton of different products. That's not the case for everyone. So if you can prepare a few of these, what I call value statements in advance, that are all mostly the same and they follow the same structure, you just change a few of the key words based on the persona that you're calling to make yourself sound more relevant. This is how I think you can move fast at a high quality. And when you're new and you've practiced this script behind the scenes, which I preach, like, don't have the real cold calls be the first time you're trying this stuff. Just for like 5-10 minutes a day, literally just practice running through this value statement for different personas, and it's going to start to flow off your tongue. And the only things you really need to change are those few keywords based on the persona you're calling. So after a few weeks of just running through this, you almost have it down by muscle memory, and you don't have to be prepared for all these different scripts. Because one more point I'll make is another thing I don't like about a lot of the training out there is and this overcomplicates the cold calls, is they teach asking too many questions or doing too much discovery too early on in the cold call. I think you need to earn that right. Like when you cold call someone and you just interrupted their day, a lot of sales trainers teach you to start asking open-ended qualifying questions right out of the gate. But the prospect's like, why am I just going to sit here and answer your questions survey style? Like, you have to answer those 3 questions for them, in my opinion. Who are you? Why are you calling? Which is like how you can help them. And then what do you want? Which is time on their calendar, because I want to give them that out. Most people don't want to have a 5-10 minute conversation. They have day jobs. They're busy. You just interrupted their day. So I at least want to let them know, hey, I'm actually more looking to set up some time next week. And now if they're not hanging up, but they're engaging with you, then now I think you've earned the right to start asking some of those questions. So yeah, I think a lot of trainers, they emphasize the wrong things at the wrong time, and it causes these, when you start asking questions too early, the call could go in so many different directions, and that's where new SDRs get lost. So I like to teach them that basic who, why, what framework. It's something that's easy, repeatable. It's a structure to follow. You don't have to change that many words. You just plug and play a few different keywords based on the persona you're calling. And then once you get used to that, then you start to get the capacity to ask more of these open-ended qualifying questions. So yeah. Hope that answers your question.
No, that's awesome, man. And I think, said from my perspective as well, I think you've actually gone into more detail than I have thought about at times, which I love. And I think one of the things that I saw, at least in my experience early on, is it's like you follow so many of these tips and tactics on how to open a call when you're first brand new to cold calling, as an example. You're so nervous about getting through the opener. And then it's like, you get someone through the opener and you ask an open-ended question and you're like, oh shit, like,
yeah, it's like
they're actually talking to me, like, what do I do?
Yeah, I remember doing that. Like, that's how, when I was new, I was asking open-ended questions, and I'm almost so nervous while asking them, I'm already thinking ahead to like, well, what do I say next? Or what if I don't know the answer to his question? And I don't even have the capacity to bring it home, because ultimately the reason I reached out is to set a meeting. And that's what I tell SDRs. You're really selling time on these cold calls. Your job isn't to run a full discovery call. Yes, you want to get some of that information if they're open to it, but your main job, you're selling time. You're giving off just enough value to that so that they want to take a meeting with you. And then if they want to engage with you, sure. But that's why I put that structure in place, because I would ask these questions when I was new, and I'd be like, how do I get this back into what I want, which is ultimately a meeting? And sometimes I'd lose them because I didn't sound confident, or I didn't know what direction I was trying to take the cold call. And then they would just hang up before I even got a chance to tell them what I wanted, which was time on their calendar. And those were the most demoralizing. It's like you just had an 8 to 10 minute call and you didn't even ask them what you wanted. And yeah, so I just preach, like, get the shot on net. When you ask what you want, it's a shot on net. You have a non-zero probability of booking the meeting, which is technically, that's an infinite increase. If you think about it on a percentage basis, you're going from a 0 to a non-zero chance of booking the meeting just by asking for time on their calendar. And I think that's better for new SDRs to do that earlier on in the call, rather than waiting till they've run a 5 to 10 minute discovery call that most prospects don't even want to do anyway.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that's a good transition too. I know, to the points you mentioned earlier, you've done a lot at Oracle, both from the SDR and SDR manager side, but also as an account executive, now working with enterprise accounts, new logos, et cetera. Maybe one last question, if there's anything here on training for account executives, like, is there anything at a high level you'd speak to that you maybe disagree with or have found effective yourself that's kind of against some of the mainstream, like, regurgitated advice out there?
Yeah, I think like when it comes to prospecting, a lot of the stuff I honestly think stays the same. I think as an account executive, you do have to be more strategic about it. You don't just want to take a meeting with any person that you can book a meeting with. It depends on where you work and what type of territory you have. When it comes to running discovery calls, and I would not call myself a discovery call expert, but I almost treat them the same way as cold calls, in that I have to deliver value first at the beginning of the cold call rather than just coming in with a bunch of prepared questions. Like I almost want to do the same thing I do on cold calls, where I deliver a sort of value statement, but tell them I want to come in with a thesis and a hypothesis as to how I can help them and how I've worked with other similar people at similar companies and similar industries as to them before I start asking questions out of the gate. Things like tell me about your role. I think that's one of the worst questions you can ask. I want to come in with a hypothesis first and tell them what I think this, like the direction of this call, like what my plan was, but then let them respond to that. And if they want to take in a different direction, sure. But at least I'm signaling that, like, I'm someone who's going to be worth working with and worth potentially taking another call with. And I don't even know what's taught out there on that, but I feel like that's not a lot of what I see taught out there does revolve around, like, tell me about your role, and asking a bunch of pre-prepared questions that fit
Peeling
your
back the onion.
answer, whatever
Yeah.
your sales methodology is. Yeah. Hope that helped.
No, I think well said. Maybe that's a follow-up conversation too, as well, because I agree. I think, it's funny. I think the training always talks about peeling back the onion, and it starts at the highest level, which sounds great in theory. It's like, oh, we'll start at the high level and we'll keep going deeper and deeper. But that's why I think it's really difficult to just see like one video and understand discovery, because in theory that sounds great. But when you talk to a prospect, and to your point, you're asking baseline questions like, tell me about your business, tell me about your role. It's just like when you can, I actually think it's more advantageous to come in with a pretty decently developed but loosely held opinion about how you think this call is going to go. And if you're wrong, they're still going to appreciate that you've gone to that depth, and they're going to be willing and excited to correct you, because you're at least already trying to meet them where they're at versus starting at absolute zero. And finally, by 10 to 12 minutes into the call, we're actually getting somewhere decent. So really well said. And probably let's make that a separate episode in of itself for sure. I'd love to talk to, for someone that's either breaking in, someone in their career right now trying to promote to an account executive role or, enterprise account executive and beyond. I'll leave it wide open. Maybe we can keep peeling it back from here. But you worked at Oracle, one of the biggest brands in tech and tech sales, certainly from a career perspective. What could you speak to in terms of how to navigate your career? You've held different positions throughout. You've gone from manager back to individual contributor, which is awesome. I think that's pretty unique and something I see not all the time. So how have you navigated your career throughout Oracle? What kind of advice could you give to someone, 3 to 5 years prior to where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I've basically just taken the opportunities that were presented to me. I don't think any career ends up having like a smooth linear trajectory. Like I moved from one side of the business to a totally different side of the business, selling something different. That wasn't my plan in the beginning. I've just taken the mindset that if I work hard, if I identify there's skills for me that I want to learn in this next role, like that's a role worth taking. I never stressed about, oh, is this the perfect group or is that the perfect group? A lot of companies have different types of organizations that you can join that might sell different products, or different size companies. Like maybe it's upmarket, mid-market, SMB. I think a lot of people get too caught up in finding the perfect group. I think really most groups are good. Like most groups at most companies will give you the experience you need, and you simply need the management in those groups to think highly of you, and you will get to where you want to go next. So like, maybe it didn't end up being the absolute perfect group where you could have maximized your income. Maybe you could have made more in a different group. but I've basically just gone into every role. It's like, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to learn to acquire the skills I want to learn in this role. And then I'm going to see what opportunities presented to me next. SDR manager, that was never a job when I was an SDR, I always thought that would be really cool to be an SDR manager. But a lot of the managers I was seeing were in their like 30s and 40s. They were 10, 15 years older than me. So I always just viewed that as like that's something maybe I'd do later in my career. But then the opportunity presented itself. And I was like, I was actually about to go to the field. And then I was like, let me see what this opportunity is about. And I just found I really loved the coaching aspect of it. I think that's why I gravitated towards making the content on YouTube too, and the different training. But I just realized that was something I was going to love. It's a skill set I learned that I don't think I would have learned how to coach SDRs in this level, like the detail that I think about it, if I had never gone into that role. Like when I was an SDR, I was not thinking about all that stuff I just laid out. I sort of was in my head, but I didn't have it as down to a science, like the value statement, who, why, what. So that was like, I felt like I learned how to coach people and put myself in their shoes and meet people where they're at in that role. But I knew I wanted to get back to the field too. And that's where I am now. And I'm learning to acquire the skills that will make me successful in this role. And then I'll see what opportunities presented to me next. But my mindset has really been go into every role with a positive mentality, work hard, acquire the skills that I want to learn in this role. And then as long as I see that there's a new opportunity ahead for me, like I could see myself going into this role or that role after I've acquired the skills in this role. That's why I've stayed where I am for 6 years now, because I feel like every role I've jumped into, I've up-leveled my skill set and grown. So that's kind of my mindset, how I've approached and navigated my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think one thing that stands out, I'd love to kind of speak to, because I know there's a lot of either BDRs or even BDR managers that are probably like, you will reach a point, it sounds like you did, correct me if I'm wrong here, at any point. But I know there's a lot of SDRs that have either been an SDR for a year, 2 years, maybe even 3, trying to make that move to AE. And or I do see BDR managers sometimes, they can potentially get pigeonholed, where if they've been an SDR and top performer and they've been a great SDR manager, like pretty much the next move at that point, especially, correct me if I'm wrong, at a company like Oracle, is probably like VP or director of business development. But it can be, and I've seen people get stuck and not really be able to make that transition to account executive or account executive manager. So were there any hurdles you experienced there, and or advice to someone that's in that SDR realm trying to make that jump that you felt really worked for you?
Yeah. So I didn't really have any hurdles, but that's because I didn't jump from being an SDR straight to an SDR manager, which generally I would not recommend. I did do 2 years as an account executive first, and then went to the SDR manager role. So I got that experience. I think it is hard a lot of companies don't even allow it to go from SDR straight to SDR manager. They do make you go into that individual contributor role first. And I think that's the reason why. If you just go from being an SDR to an SDR manager, running sales cycles is different. Like the sales business development's more focused on the front end of the funnel and reaching out, generating qualified leads for then the individual contributor sales teams to then drive those sales cycles. If you don't get that sales cycle experience, you can get pigeonholed in the SDR role, and you might have to move to an account executive type role that you don't feel is up to par based on your experience. I have seen that. So I would tread carefully there. In terms of moving from like BDR, SDR to account executive, I think you have to perform obviously as a BDR, SDR, but you want to show you have that role down. We've talked about this in our last conversation. Like when you really master that role, it almost becomes too easy. Like you can do what took you 4 or 5 hours before in like an hour. Like you almost get the job down to a science where you then have the capacity to teach other BDRs and SDRs and do things like join account executive team meetings, like start networking and reaching out and getting involved in those organizations. Because you have the SDR, BDR role down to a science, you have so much leftover capacity to start learning about the account executive role and networking. I don't think it's too complicated. Like a lot of people complicate it. I think yes, you have to get good at the BDR, SDR job. Let's assume you've done that and you're hitting your number. Then it becomes about get your face out there, involve yourself in these organizations you're trying to join, reach out to the manager, ask if you can just simply sit on their team meetings as a silent participant, maybe take on some extra work and work with some of their struggling account executives if you want to talk to their manager about it and help them white space their territory and even prospect on behalf of them, even though it's not technically supporting your metrics. It's doing those simple things that will put yourself on the manager's radars of the groups that you want to join so that when a spot opens up, you're the name that comes to mind. I don't even think especially internally, if you're promoting internally, the interviews aren't even as important. It's because those managers are going to reach out to your manager and they're going to say, what is this person like? Like, yes, if you're applying externally, that might be a little different, but when it comes to promoting internally, it's more about your brand. Are you performing? Do they know who you are? Are you going a little above, beyond just the SDR, BDR role of setting meetings and generating pipeline? Like, do you have the capacity to, because as an account executive, that's expected to just be second nature to you. That's like one piece of your job is setting meetings and generating pipeline. You have to have the extra capacity left over to be able to effectively drive the sales cycles. So
yeah, that's awesome. And maybe on that note too, because I think oftentimes, you get really focused on, at least speaking for myself, you get very focused on hitting your number, doing the right things to attain quota. And that carries a lot of weight, I'm sure. Maybe speaking to some of these softer skills that you mentioned, like aside from a manager on the AE team, checking with your manager and asking who's good, what are they like, et cetera, those times where you mentioned you're reaching out to managers and shadowing them. Are there other ways, like a little bit more tactical? How do you approach that situation without looking like totally needy? What are ways that you kind of, evangelize your brand within Oracle the right way versus the wrong way that looks like desperate, looks like you're only just trying to get that AE role and don't really care about the relationship itself?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can state your intent. I mean, a lot of these managers, these AE managers have been around the block and they know that these SDRs and BDRs want to become account executives. A lot of them just wait. They don't reach out. They rely on luck or them reaching out to the manager to then recommend them. I don't think it comes across as needy. I think it comes across as you taking the bull by the horns and being proactive and telling them, here's who I am, here's how I've performed. I want to join your org for these reasons. Like maybe they cover some specific industry or work with certain size accounts, and tell them why that's a group you want to join. Tell them you've heard good things. Oh, here's another thing. Before reaching out to the manager, I would reach out to the reps on their team and meet with all of them and learn about how they go about their day-to-days and what it's like working for X and so manager, so that when you go to this manager, you're partially doing the role before you join and meet with the manager. You can tell them, here's what I've learned about your group. Like, here's what I've done to prepare. And then once you've shown like you're willing to do that, that's when you can then ask like, hey, do you mind if I sit as a silent participant on team meetings? Or maybe when you're running like a one-on-one call with one of your account executives, like, can I join just to see how they think about white spacing their territory and how they attack the territory, and I'll help them in any way that I can, things like that. So yeah, I don't even view it as needy. I view it as being proactive and showing them here's what it's going to be like having me on your team. I think another thing you can do is, you don't have to go to the level I did where I was like running a lot of trainings, but like if you're succeeding as a BDR, SDR, it's not hard to just reach out to your manager or director and say, hey, I want to host a 30-minute meeting on Friday just to show here's messaging that's been working for me, or here's how I've been using this company tool to segment and find better leads and contacts, and share what's been working for you. Show that you're so abundant, like you have this roll down, that you have the capacity to take on this extra stuff. Because then when spots open up, you're naturally going to promote. You're not going to have to force your way into an account executive role if you're going above and beyond and doing things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome feedback. And that really great job kind of explaining the nuances of that, because I think a lot of people get caught up, they psych themselves out. And or, conversely, I think I've been in situations where I personally maybe jumped the gun, or just didn't think through exactly how to go about that situation. And it came off the wrong way, even though it was well-intentioned. So really good stuff. This has been an awesome conversation. I think maybe as an ending point, one of the things I wanted to tap on, at least for this combo, is I know you've led, correct me if I'm wrong, hundreds of interviews at this point at Oracle. Maybe just a few high-level, pointers for people, whether it's Oracle or anywhere else. Some of the things that you've seen that, really attract you to a candidate and show you very quickly that they're probably a good fit. And also some of the things that maybe call them the silent killers. I think, the obvious stuff is out there in terms of what not to do, but what are ways, maybe subtle ways, that people are shooting themselves in the foot and they don't even realize?
Yep. It's a good question. And my answer is probably not going to be surprising because it's like a common theme is that less is more and nail the basics. So like once you're in the interview, in my opinion, don't worry about things like your resume. Like a lot of that stuff has already done its job once you're there. Now the manager is going to be like, it's almost a gut feel like, okay, is this person someone I want on my team? And for me, it was always basic things. Like the first question I usually let off with, so why do you want to go into sales, or why do you want to work for Oracle in my case, or why do you want to work for X company? Other variations of this are like, tell me about yourself. What led you to this interview? This is your chance in the beginning to knock it out of the park, because those are the most obvious questions you should be expecting as a candidate. Like what you're applying for an entry-level sales position. Why do you want to go into sales? Or why do you want to work for this company? And if you're not prepared to answer those questions, if you feel like you're coming up with the answer on the spot and it's like, and things like I'm a people person, I don't really care what your answer is. There's no right answer. But if you sound like you've prepared and showed up for this, you can take control of the interview and really convince them in that first 5 minutes. I know that's what I did when I was interviewing, is I had like 5 minutes, not memorized word for word, but like points I wanted to hit on. And I could tell, like, and I've had this happen to me when I was interviewing people, it was like a wow factor. Like, oh, this person came ready to play ball. And then they almost lead you off the script. Like a lot of interviewers, they almost have like a script they have to follow, like certain questions they need to ask. But if you knock it out of the park, you'll get that manager off the script, and they'll genuinely want to start like connecting with you and like want to get you on their team. So for me, it's the basics. Like nail that first 5 minutes of the interview. Things like those are obvious questions. Why sales? Why do you want to work for this company? Strengths and weaknesses is like, it's almost another gauge of like, that's one you should probably be expecting. I'll give you 3 strengths that I think like any person watching this, if they share this in an interview, I think are good qualities to look for, is that you're a hard worker, you're coachable, and you're a team player. And you can weave those into your answers. Like if you're someone who works hard, you're ready to take feedback and apply it. And then when you do take that feedback and apply it and you succeed, you're going to help me and the rest of my team and make my life easier. You're a slam dunk candidate, in my opinion. Like who wouldn't want to hire someone like that? And then any other question you get asked, you can weave in those qualities, like showcasing how you were a hard worker, how you took feedback and applied it, or how you were a team player. So I really think it's the basics. Also, when it comes to the end and there's questions, have some questions prepared that you've put some thought into. Don't be the person not to have any questions. But you don't need to go over the top either. Just have some good, solid questions prepared that show you've done background on the company. So don't ask like, what does the role entail? Or like, what does my day-to-day look like? Like ask a genuine question about like, I saw this on the website, or that you target these types of companies, and like weave in some sort of question that shows you've done preparation and research. Or you could show you've researched the manager's career path. And so like, this is a career path I'm thinking of taking, and like ask a question about their career path, show you've done some research. So for me, it's really the basics. You don't need to worry about things as much like the cold call role play. That's usually a feature of it. I've done so many of these, it's hard to simulate a cold call role play when it's not an actual cold call. And most of them aren't good, frankly. And that's not like a bad thing. It's just like most people haven't done this before. Really what I think managers more are looking for on the cold call role play is, let's assume the first go around doesn't go well, and the manager is like, hey, try this differently on the next one. Can you take that feedback and apply it? That's going to be a good signal. Like, okay, they're going to take feedback and apply it on the job. And then close them at the end too. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, in my opinion, but at the end of the interview, just say something like, hey, based on our conversation today, do you think I would be a good fit for X role, like the SDR role at X company? something simple like that. And then follow up with them in an email after and be like, hey, it was a great conversation. Here's what I like, let them know, here's what I took away, remind them why you would be a good fit for the role. If you're doing little things like that, you're going to stand out from like 95% of candidates, because a lot of people just come in and wing it and they don't know much about the company or the role. You can tell by the questions they're asking that they haven't put more than 10 minutes of research into what the company does or what the SDR role entails. And it's hard to overcome that stuff. It just, the questions start popping in my head like, does this person actually want to be here? Or was this just like a random resume they fired out type thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a good point to close on too, because a lot to unpack there, but also appreciate that because I think you laid that out really well. And there's different points that people overthink, don't prepare enough for. You mentioned doing too much, and maybe aside from the tell me about yourself, because that's a obvious place where people probably talk for 10 minutes, way too long, way too much information. Are there other parts that aren't maybe commonly addressed, whether it's that first interview and or later stages throughout the interview where, like, what's a good example of doing too much for someone that may not realize they're doing that, if something comes to mind?
It's a good question. The most obvious one to me is like in the beginning, like things like tell me about yourself. That's not really a question I like to ask, but I just like to face facts too. Like a lot of managers do ask that question to start, so you should be prepared. That's more a question like, show me what you got type thing. Like, show me what you prepared. It's not like, yeah, you can tell them a little bit like, yeah, I'm from Boston, I studied this in college, but then get into it. Tell them who you are, why you want to work for this company, and why you would be a good fit. They don't need to know about all your different hobbies. Yes, it would be nice if they wanted to know about you're really into skiing or something, but like save that for when you actually have the job. Like, we're in an interview here, like know the purpose of the call, why you're here. I'm trying to think of some other areas, like maybe at the end, you don't have to have too many questions either. Like that's another one where some reps just want to ask like 7, 8 questions. The time's passed, we're like 10 minutes past the interview slot and they're like, wait, just one more question. Have like 3 to 5 prepared. Couple of them will probably get answered in the interview. If you have like two questions, 3 questions at the end, that's more than enough if you've like put some thought into them. And a lot of it, yeah, is just not over stressing about some of the other stuff, like the cold call role play. Like, do enough to show that you're prepared in all of these areas, that you like put some thought into it. You're not coming up with stuff on the spot. Like, you show, I prepared, I want to be here, I'm serious about this role, I want to work hard. Anything beyond that, like technique stuff, that's not really what the purpose of the interview is. The purpose of the interview is to determine character traits, really. Like, is this person not someone I can develop, I can turn into a successful SDR here? Not necessarily are they like ready to sit down and make dials on day one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. We're obviously going to have to do a follow-up one of these in the future because there's tons of questions I wanted to ask, but I know we're already coming up on an hour, which is awesome. For everyone listening, again, Connor Murray is on YouTube under his name, Connor Murray. So I highly recommend, whether it's the cold calling stuff or some of the things we talked about today, checking out his channel. It's got a lot of deep dives there completely for free that I personally have found in my own career, having bought a lot of trainings. Like, your free stuff is better than pretty much every single one of the paid stuff I bought online. And also too, just a reminder to everyone, if you're on YouTube, we are on Spotify as well. If you want to listen to these on the go, and vice versa, we are on YouTube if you're listening on Spotify. And obviously, Connor, excited to have you as part of higherlevels.com. Anyway, enough about us. Connor, really great conversation. Appreciate the insight. Anything else to leave us with? And if not, that's totally cool. This was awesome.
No, it's thank you for having me on. This is a great conversation. Hopefully the audience got a lot of value out of it. And yeah, let's run it back soon.